Hello, Booktube. My name is Dennis, and today you're watching The Intellectual Reads. Today I would like to review The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, his masterpiece, and I have been motivated to pick up this book for the first time by Mathew at Mayberry Bookclub. We are doing a read-along, or actually he's hosting a read-along of this book, and it's been sitting on my bookshelf for ages, and I thought that this would be a great time to pick it up finally. And I have always wanted to read Thomas Mann. He has been somewhat a daunting author on my list, and one I was maybe hesitant to pick up because I thought that this book might be difficult, but I had always wanted to read a work of his because I know in the canon he is a pretty important person. Going into this book, I had no idea what it was about, and actually let me correct myself and say that today I will be reviewing the first half of this book, and there will be a subsequent video of my impressions once I have finished it, and I will wrap it up in this video. But because this read-along is being hosted by Mathew, and there has been numerous videos published by him regarding this book, some of the things he says I quite disagree with, and others I full-heartedly back up. So I thought that it would be pretty nice for me to also contribute to his read-along by posting a video of my impressions as I'm about halfway through the book. To give you a specific place that I'm at, it's at the end of chapter 4, I believe. Let me just make sure. So yeah, so I'm reviewing this book from chapters 1 through chapter 5. My particular edition was published by the Franklin Library. Thomas Mann first published this work in I believe it was 1924, and it was issued as Der Zauberberg by S. Fischer Verlag in Berlin. This copy that I have has some nice pictures in it, and it's quite an interesting read. So let's get into the thick of it. As we begin this work of The Magic Mountain, we start to follow our protagonist, Hans Kastrup, a young man who just finished his engineering school and is on leave to visit a cousin of his who is staying at a sanatorium and being treated for a health condition. I believe it's somewhat related to tuberculosis, which at the time didn't really have a cure. So Hans, before embarking on an apprenticeship at a shipbuilding factory, visits his cousin and takes a 3-week trip. In the preface, though, we are told by Thomas Mann himself that this story is centered around Hans Kastrup and that his stay might last up to 7 years. The first quarter of the book, so the first half of what I'm reviewing of the book, follows this 3-week stay. Now, my first impression of the sanatorium was a eerie, cold place with a really dark and bad vibe. Something that I would relate to almost starting kind of a setting that I would relate to a horror story. The reasons that it portrayed a very cold and dark and negative vibe for me, well, not so much negative, but more like just an eerie feeling that chills you at the bone. Some things that gave me this kind of feeling as a reader is the fact that, you know, you have dead people being transported from the sanitarium down a hill on bobsleds. The people there don't know when somebody has died, so they take out the dead people or the people who have passed away at the sanatorium behind everybody's back, so it's very secretive. The rooms are extremely cold. They're never heated properly. It can snow and be quiet, cold, and winter-like in the season of summer, especially during the August months. The two doctors that are on premises are both described as very shady characters, somewhat cold. Also, their offices are down in the basement, not where you would expect a doctor's office who's overseeing a big sanatorium to be. So it gives you this feeling like you're being transported inside a very dark, mysterious, and eerie place. For example, if I was Hans and I had visited a cousin there, I can tell you that my reaction would be like, okay, dude, like, I see your place, I see you're getting treated, but you know what? I don't want to stay here for my own sanity. Let me get a hotel outside of this particular setting, and I can visit you, and we can take walks outside. But for me to spend 24 hours a day here, I feel like my state of mind might be compromised. That would be my reaction. But Hans himself doesn't try to flee. Especially one of the instances is when he arrives and notices that his room has been chemically cleaned because a person has just passed away. He walks down the halls and there's this serious person with this unbelievably, in a way, in depth. This is what man has, this ability to describe in depth a dry cough that is just permeating through this whole room and this hallway, and gives Hans such a disgusting and worrying feeling upon entering his room that, you know, pack my bags and get the fuck out of there. But he stays. And so we kind of, in essence, in the first part of the book, are introduced to very particularly odd characters. There's a girl walking by in the hilltops, and she whistles, and this like freaks him out, but it's because she has ribs removed and she can do this to her thorax, and and she laughs at him and creeps him the fuck out. But you know what, like, he's kind of very, the thing you initially learn about Hans is that he doesn't take action. He's a man who, in whatever situation he is present in, he will allow the leader of that situation to lead him wherever the leader wants to take him. Meaning, like, whoever's in charge, Hans will give himself up to go in the direction that person wants to lead him. Whether it be mentally, whether it be physically. He strikes me as a character with no backbone whatsoever. A character who never takes action, and even when something really, really attracts him, he's one to hesitate. This also becomes quite evident in the beginning of the book, because one of my impressions was when he comes down with something and 3 weeks in and it's time for him to leave, and he goes for a physical and he's told to stay, the first thing he questions is, will people consider him a fraud? So you can see inside of Franz's mind that to him, it's not important to lead or upset anybody. It's important to fall in and be one of the community. He naturally is a sheep that wants to be led. This is evident because when he extends his stay, this fear of not fitting in is so detrimentally within his mind that he can't feel a part of the community until he goes down and gets an x-ray. And the x-ray actually proves that within his lungs there's a problem. And once he sees it, he requests for this x-ray And he then puts it in his wallet and carries it everywhere with him as kind of like a membership card, like a badge that he can show and validate that he belongs among these freaks. Because honestly, the people here are a little bit freaky. But yet, as a reader, you're not so much disgusted by him, by this mentality, because you kind of realize where it comes from. Especially when his background is given, you realize that he's a person who has both his parents dead, and at the same time, the people who looked after him after the deaths of his parents, of his grandparents, then he was sent down to his uncles, and you get this kind of like his background in a chapter. And you start to realize that he's never had a commanding voice. He's never had anybody to really pay attention to him. He was well off, he had a good dowry, but the people who were looking after him, like his uncle, had his own sons to worry about. So nobody ever really was able to get enough control over him to make him develop his own will. He's kind of just flowed by. He's been in the back of the picture for most of his life, never the center of attention, so he never almost develops a personality. In fact, he is scared to ruffle anybody's feathers. At least that's the impression I get. And I think he's kind of the perfect person for this story by Thomas Mann, because the way Thomas Mann constructs his story is he will give you a little bit of the plot and he will move the plot forward, but then he will put a little interlude, and this interlude is the meeting of Franz with either his cousin, between him and an Italian humanist who's also a writer, and one who imparts his kind of way of life onto Hans, the meetings between Hans and the doctors. So you get the movement of the plot, then you get an interesting kind of philosophical discussion framed within the contours of a chat between Franz and somebody, and then it never harbors down the story. You never feel like it's ever too long, because then the plot will move forward. And it's this masterful control that Thomas Mann has over his story. And it's almost like you have like a little mental lunch where an idea will be brightened within your head, and then you move forward. And there are so many ideas within Thomas Hans's brain that it's always exciting for these little interludes, because you know that there will be some knowledge, some sophisticated debate going on. And I just love the construct and the way this novel is written. It's very simple, but yet the execution is perfect. One of the major topics that Thomas Mann kind of imparts in this first half of the book is the idea of time, and especially time through space. And I found this very similar to even the construct of the book, how, you know, the first quarter is 3 weeks, the second quarter is 7 to 8 months, and then each subsequent quarter or each part of the book, the time expands, but it's kind of done in where the page is narrow, if that makes any sense. So if it's, you know, 300 or like 150 pages for 3 weeks, then it's 150 pages for 7-8 months, and then it'll be 150 pages probably for, you know, 2-3 years, and then the last 150 pages would include eternity, something like that. So it's an interesting debate that he has within this book on time itself, but this book is also constructed in a way where the time of the story accelerates. And so what would have taken in the beginning of the story a certain amount of pages can take a paragraph at the end of it. And this idea of time is an extremely interesting concept to me, because in the Nabokov novel that I read, Ada or Adore, it is based on this conception. And so now that I see Thomas Mann employ it and do it way before Nabokov, I'm almost reminiscing and seeing a lot of similarities between the two authors. If you have not read Ada or Adore, it is one of the most difficult books I've read, but a very rewarding experience, and one that will make you see the world in a different way. So back to Thomas Mann's idea of time as he explains it within the first half, in a conversation that Hans has. This idea is developed where when you're living in the present and you find yourself in a time of your life where you're very active, that time seems to fly by. When you're living in the present and you find yourself in a time where you're bored, where you can't do much, something that people probably are witnessing now with the whole isolation and different parts of the world, and not being able to leave your home for weeks, days, whatever it may be, that time seems to drag on. Every minute seems like an hour, every whatever it may be. But the dichotomy here is that when you look back upon your life, so when you look back on the past, it's the time when you actually were busy that seems to be spaced out, because you can remember a lot of things that are going on in those times, a lot of things that happened during your busy times in life stand out way more than the boring times. So it's actually the boring times now that are fast forwarding, and the busy times that are slowing down. And so this dichotomy between how we view time in the present and how we view time in the past shifts. And this shift that Thomas Mann catches and expounds upon is so eye-opening, quite as eye-opening as the last part of Ada or Adore, where Nabokov has his own take on time. If you ever read also the book about dreams and Nabokov's recording of dreams, where he believed that when we dream, time moves faster, and in our dreams, that's why we can see the future, and so therefore we have deja vu moments. That's why he was a vicious Nabokov, that is, a recorder of dreams. But that's another topic, because he believed that he could catch instances of his future in his dreams. And I think that being a creepy sanatorium, cold, disgusting, and all of these things, it's actually the Magic Mountain is the reference to this time concept. Because if you think about the magic landscape, wherever you read a magic story, it is often there that time seems to disappear. Time's constraints that it puts on people seems to wade away. In the magical land, nobody's ever worried about time, because in the magical land we almost live to eternity. And so I think it's a reference to time, because the first thing upon Hans's arrival at the sanatorium, whereas this idea that Joachim imparts in Hans' brain, where he tells him that whereas at the sanatorium a month can move in the pace that a day moves down in the real world. And so this idea of time is, I think, the theme behind the title Magic Mountain. I could be wrong, I'm halfway into it, but this is kind of a nugget that I'm following in my head as I am developing ideas upon being kind of fully committed to this novel. So halfway through the book, this is where we find ourselves. We find ourselves following a character who has no spleen and kind of has no opinions of his own, so other people can reflect their opinions, and therefore Thomas Mann, through these people, can kind of maybe give his own ideas and concepts and philosophical undertaking through the novel that he may want to critique the society he found himself in, because this book was written 10 years before the First World War. So there was obviously a lot of misconception politically, a lot of people probably doing things that Thomas Mann did not approve himself of. So this critique of society 10 years prior is, I think, being relayed by the people within the sanatorium that Hans comes across and through these conversations. Again, if I'm honest, I don't really hate Hans. I don't want to get this impression. But he's not a noble character to follow. He has a lot of human perceptions, and as much as I disapprove of him, I find a lot of my own bad qualities within him. So he's very, very relatable in that sphere. But I think the better word for him at this point is that I'm so frustrated with him that I just want to give him a kick in the ass and have him make a choice to move his life forward, rather than always trying to fit in and being a person of that age. He's wasting the best years of his life. As the Italian humanist particularly states, he should be working to improve society and improve his own position in life. And while Hans nods his head in agreement because he agrees with everybody, but yet he turns away from these conversations with the humanist and embarks in a closer relationship with the doctor, because he knows this is this is the path that he wants to go on. He wants to be committed to this sanatorium and not have to go on to the real world, because the real world is the world that requires action, that requires work, that requires doing something rather than just dreaming. He's caught in a magical dream which he doesn't want to leave, because it's much easier to dream and read and philosophize than it is to actually do work of value. So I'm going to just leave that at that. I'm going to leave with you guys my frustration in the character of Hans, my appreciation of the structure and the ideas that Thomas Mann imparts in this first half of the novel. And I would love to know your guys' opinion, if you agree with me or you can totally disagree with me. Maybe you can challenge me on my frustration and dislike of our main character. Or maybe you can validate this frustration with your own opinions and relate to me that I'm not the only crazy one who's not in love with our main character. So I'm going to leave that here, and I thank you for watching this, and I can't wait to be back with my final impression once I finish the book.